First of all, Hafisa, I'm just so happy that we're doing this.
Me too. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sarai.
Your
Yes.
your piece, Theater Forgiveness, is just like so amazing, and that's why you don't just have me, you also have Sarai Bordeaux here asking you asking you some questions. And but I get the first one if that's okay. Um,
Yeah.
just for article clubbers, we've read your piece, we love your piece, but we would love to give you a little space just to talk about you a little bit, to share a little bit about you. So, could you introduce yourself just a little bit and sort of just share a little bit about who you are?
It's a big old question mark. Like, well, it all started in 1984. Technically 1983, but let's not talk about that. Yeah, so I think, I am a writer and a poet. My poetry book came out in September. And then, this is part of a larger nonfiction project that I've just finished up. And this was my very first like nonfiction essay that I'd really written, because I was just kind of there, it's some for all the things I was trying to untangle, poetry just didn't have enough space. But I think that regardless of what genre I'm writing in, I'm writing about and for Black and African people, and trying to how do we understand the narrative of ourselves in this place when the narrative that we've been like that's been written over in like the mass culture is one that's so dangerous, so toxic, and so deeply untrue, you know? And so that's kind of like where like I think my obsessions as a writer happen. And then I think you can tell by my writing that like I'm very much invested in like understanding intimacy across different types, And so that's just more about the piece, but I was born in Zaria, Nigeria. Like my mother was a Muslim Nigerian woman, and my father is a Black American man who was born in like Alabama and George Wallace's Alabama in like 1945, born in Jim Crow, and my parents met at Ohio University when like my dad was in grad school for his MFA in painting. And my auntie Myro happened to be, she was an educator in Nigeria, and she was a visiting scholar at like Ohio University. And like my mom had come to like help her take care of like her two younger kids. And like my mother was walking up the stairwell, my father was walking down. They met, they went on 2 dates, then they got married. Like, sometimes it works. Um, and then they after they were married, they lived in the States for a little bit. Then my dad moved back to Nigeria with my mom, where me and my sister were born. And then after that, like we moved to the States. But other than like, I don't know, what do you want to know about me? It's like, what about you, Mark? Huh? Like,
This is about you. This is not about me.
yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
I also appreciate also how you talk about sort of maybe how this piece got started. Can you say more about that, the origination, how this piece emerged, and also specifically who you're writing to and why?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I don't think I had any clue who I was writing to when I started it. Like, I was just like, I want to try writing nonfiction. I've been thinking, I've been literally like thinking about it for like years, and then just mainly stayed afraid to do it. And then finally, like, through a friend of a friend, this woman was teaching a writing nonfiction workshop in her apartment just for women. I'm just like, it was a 6 week. I'm just like, it was affordable. I can make this commitment. And I'm just like, let me just try. And so I really started in that group with those women, like the germ of the idea. And so, I mean, but it was like, I got out like, 10 pages of it in, in that. But like, really, I think around this time as I was writing it, like my aunt's health was already slipping. And so it was also trying to understand like the complication of like my father's guilt, because even it's like all Black people and like their feelings, you know? And so him, even though he knows what happened to me was wrong, the inability to say it, and it caused a lot of tension between us because like I didn't really realize until like I got into therapy myself and started unpacking other things how much that deeply like that my relationship with my aunt Sarah deeply impacted me because like I was, you know, any writer that any child that turns into a writer is a sensitive child, you know. And like my father is a visual artist. He did the cover of this. So this is my mom 9 months pregnant with my sister, um like the when we lived in Nigeria. And so what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. Oh, that like, and so trying to really unpack like who, what does pain do and who does pain belong to, you know, because, you know, especially like being black, like pain is so communal, you know, and like and to have communal pain in a country that refuses mourning, you know, and also refuses black pain. And it's like this idea of the toxicness because like my just like, you know, my dad loves telling stories, and so I grew up with stories of what he and like my aunt Sarah and my aunt Liz escaped, right? And like they escaped so much violence, not just like in the world but like in their home and like poverty. And to think that like what does it mean that like the cruelty that my aunt got in her life she gave to me, and why. And you know, around, you know, the Charleston shooting, you know, I grew up in South, I came of age in South Carolina. I moved there when I was like 15. And I was there until I graduated from college from Clemson in like 2006. And you know, you just notice that like black people are always forgiving. And just like watching Dylan Roof be taken to a drive through, and just like, and but also just to think that like, I mean, most people, like when you think about how long time is, like if you ask someone to like look at each other in the eye for like a minute, it's almost so hard. But to think that he sat there the entire prayer service, you know what I mean? And like, and then did what he did. And then when I just like started, like, you know, then all the articles started coming out, and then just thinking about like the family literally forgiving him in the courts that locks us up, you know, I'm just like, what does that mean? You know, I think like America loves convincing us that we should be mad at black people for what this country has done to us. And I'm just like, forgiveness, like where does this forgiveness stem from? And then, you know, like so like one of the things, like one of the chapters in my book is is like is like talking about like the evolution of like the blues from spirituals. And you know, like the blues evolved after emancipation, right? It's essentially the child of spirituals, because if you think about it, like because it happened like shortly after free emancipation. So if you think about it, like no white slave master wanted their cruelty sang at them, so you had to code them, you know. And that like you were allowed no rage, that your rage could be deadly, you know. And thinking about like what that does to you, and just thinking about like what poverty and what cruelty does to you when you're literally against the law to give it to anybody but yourself or the people around you, you know. And like and like and I, you know, I tend to be just like, I'm someone who's like always searching for origin points of things. And so I wanted to know, like, where did that forgiveness stem from? Like, yes, we are, like, black people are incredibly forgiving people, but it's not just that we're awesome. You know what I mean? It's that like, you know, in this idea of epigenetics, right? And it could also stem from like years ago, I was listening to this, you know, On Being with Krista Tippett, the podcast. It's really good if you guys haven't checked it out. But she did this episode on epigenetics, and they like this woman, I forget her name, but this researcher she had went to the, I think, a small town in New Jersey to research Holocaust survivors. It's like, it's this town that had like the highest concentration of Holocaust survivors, and they wanted to study the effect of trauma on the body of those memories. And what they found was they ended up studying the children, because they found that the people that showed the most like impact of the trauma was the children of the survivors, you know. And this idea that like and it rings true, because when people who are children of Holocaust survivors, when you ask them who they are, they would have answered this question: I'm a child of a Holocaust survivor, right? You know, this in the pressure of just being like, I lived for you, now go be my ambition. And then she also talks about like how they also were studying like women who were pregnant during 9/11, and it changed, the stress changed the chemistry in their body, you know. And just thinking about like, then what has epigenetics done to us, you know? What has it gotten into us? And this like, and this perform that like when you're, because to be Black, you're constantly on the stage, right, of constantly having to perform a certain type of like acceptability to be safe. And even then, like, you can't even bird watch, you know. So you're always in this performance. And so that like, what do you do when, like, how do you get back to, how do you find your life again when you've essentially lived in the performance the entire time, you know? And so like, I knew I'd spent so long just kind of being so like angry. Like, anger isn't even the right word for what I felt for my answer. I still even don't know how to, because it's mixed up with so much, with like anger, shame, like sadness, and like confusion. But like, and I was just like thinking that, like, you know, at this point in my life, I'm old enough where I have to forgive her, and like, or at least make amends with it, you know. I don't like, Sarah and I like never got to the point where we're like friends, you know. But like, I knew that like I had to find some type of peace, because it wasn't that like, I realized that my anger towards the situation wasn't that I was just keeping that in, you know, like that was also going places too. And so I realized that I'm also repeating this pattern, and that to forgive her like meant that I really had to understand her, you know. And I think that, like, you know, white America is the only group that gets to live in memoir alone, you know. Black people, we live in history, we live in like, you know, like we live in all the genres, you know. And so like, how do you understand like the multifaceted genres of life? And then, you know, then I kind of started thinking that like, okay, if we are trained to give forgiveness away to white people, what happens if we save it for ourselves? And I think, you know, so much of what I was wrote in there, I literally just like figured out as I went along, you know. And you know, there's something about when about your, it's hard to hold on to your anger when your bully has just so physically weak, you know. And it's just like at the end, you know. And then like, and then there were so many people that she loved and was kind to, you know. And like, my Uncle Raj was like one of the sweetest men I like ever knew. And the fact that like their marriage always just like, I was just like, you know what I mean? And so the fact that like all her rage had nowhere to go but me, and like as an adult now, I can realize how lonely that must have been for her, you know what I mean? Because like, I was just a receptacle for everything she didn't get.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Wow. That was just like, there's I mean, kind of, I feel like you kind of answered a lot of the questions that I was having in my mind, kind of speaking to like the loneliness that somebody might feel. Like, what do we owe, like, in forgiveness truly? Like, what do we, if we do say forgiveness for ourselves, like, what kind of conversations does that mean for our like dinner times? Like, what kind of conversations that, and one of the things that I wrote down as I was reading your piece is, it just has to do with that kind of thing. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean if we live our whole lives giving our best to white people and having to deal with like our traumas at home when we're so angry, so fed up, and so this and so that? So in educational spaces, in workspaces, and all these different places where, you know, we're expected to do not only forgiveness, but to perform like to perform even being able to stand certain people, like even being able to agree with you know, for fear of losing your job or for fear of whatever. Not being able to air your personal grievances without being called aggressive or you know, playing the race card or whatever. Like, what does that mean when all of your energy is expanded to people who don't respect you? Then you try to go home to places where you are so-called loved. But the love relationship is so complex now that we've passed on trauma to, you know, and we have to now blend those things together.
Because like, you know, Horton Spillers talks about like, you know, she's a Black scholar who's like brilliant, and she talks about like, you know, the origin of intimacy in this country, right? And so intimacy was based like the first like relationships of colonization are like a white slave master and his wife who is jealous of the enslaved woman and like all this cruelty. So, you know, is there ever been a good intimacy in this country? And so all intimacy is based off of that relationship, right? Like our idea of like what partnership is like, and you can see that with like, you know, like some of the toxic masculinity that can like haunt Black men, you know, with
form like a certain way, then it's deadly. Like if we're not able to make the image, or you know, if we're not able to perform to the archetype, you know, then our behaviors are quite possibly deadly. And one of the questions that I had kind of has to do with like, you know, now that we are in, I mean, not now that like this, all of the things that we're dealing with are cyclical and have shown themselves in iteration in history. But I'm wondering like specifically, like how do we center ourselves? Like how do we fortify like ourselves? And I kind of wanted to ask you this, like as an extension to what you had written 2 years ago, like, you know, what new things have you gleaned? Like, you know, like what new? For sure. Especially when considering like, even like we know in the election right now, like, yes, that's cool. And there's all this other fuck shit. Like, all this, like, when do we get to be happy? Like, period. Like, when do we get happy? Like with no caveat, you know, like, when do we get to deal with
you know, I would argue that like Black happiness is what makes us so dangerous. Cause like, I always joke with people, like you go to a park, right? And like at the park, there's just like a quinceañera going on. There was a tyrant party right next to a birthday party. And just like Black people and like Latinx people like of color from like are hanging out with each other across generations and being loud as fuck, right? But then you look over and see white people, they're all around the same age group and they're all, you can barely hear them, right? I'm just like, where is that joy? And the thing is like, they call the cops on ours, you know, because like my dad like to say, it's because like they cannot fathom how we could be happy, like given all they deny they've done to us, that they know they've done to us.
The audacity of you to have a smile on your face, like
and especially in a country, you know, that is based off racial capitalism, right? So like, you know, when you think about like any type of marginalized group, Black people, Indigenous people, disabled people, like we have been forced to live on the outskirts of capitalism, right? And this country like needs us, especially right now, like we're like, it needs us to believe that capitalism is the only way, and our existence keeps proving there's another alternative, right? And so that makes us so dangerous. But in terms, I think of like what I've learned, you know, over how this piece has stayed with me through the years, I think especially like right now, I think this idea of forgiving whiteness over and over again, that's a cage, that's prison. But like bringing forgiveness home to the community, that's abolition work. You know what I mean? And I think that like, you know, with the conversation that's happening around like, you know, defunding the cops, abolishing prison, but just like abolishing a carceral system that is literally just a key element to racial capitalism. Like, and to do that, like we have to understand our rage and like and like understand that like rage is beautiful and powerful, because rage is often like your body telling you have a line, you know.
I thought it was,
and that like it has to be drawn. Hold on, all my plant lights are going off. 1 second.
Sorry.
So I think that like really understanding, because it's like, you know, the ability to forgive, I think, is as important as an ability to hold rage. I mean, like if someone hurt your child in a deep way, you wouldn't be like, yeah, forgive them.
Right.
Why? Because they haven't done anything to say they're not going to hurt you again. You know what I mean?
I that is something too, that I was writing down, kind of, it was circling back in all of the notes that I took. I remember you said that something that rage is rooting, like it's grounded.
Yeah.
Grounding.
Yeah.
And there's something about that is so, it's not only like beautiful, but it's like sustainable, right? Like if we're gonna get this like generational trauma, like we're gonna also get passed on this understanding, hopefully in the coming generations, that we don't necessarily have to forgive for that rage.
Yeah.
One thing I thought was so interesting in connection was how, you know, harm is perpetrated, and then folks who cause the harm are able to say like what the healing is. And I feel like that's part of the reason that like white people need this theater, because they're like, we need to upkeep this image that America is this place where people get to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
The only way that works, and the only way that capitalism works, is to say like, no, like, you know, like this was necessary to get where we are. Like you're a part of this story too, but only in this certain way. So I really appreciate like not only how your story deviated, but how you hinted to that your dad's story also deviated, how he held on to rage, like how he was not quick to forgive. I think oftentimes like the ability to forgive, it's passed down communally, but the example in our homes is also, it's either divergent or it converges with that mainstream. In addition to speaking to a little bit more to like how can we center ourselves in our own rage, like can you talk about like maybe like what's happening in mainstreams versus what's happening in like, you know, familial circles as it comes to forgiveness? Do you see a divergence in the message right now? Or
I mean I think like I feel like white people through Trump are not even pretending they care anymore. You know what I mean? White America. And I think that like that, you know, my father spent his whole life being raised by a woman he couldn't protect. You know what I mean? And I think that like my father also witnessed like, you know, I feel like if a group of people that deserve their rage more than anybody is Black women, and we are so consistently denied it, you know? Like, you know, we are abused in so many ways. We're set up to not be believable. We're assaulted, and then they kill our children, and then they kill us. You know what I mean? Like we literally weather away, you know? And so I think I really appreciate like the way, like, you know, I think it's, you know, the fact of having parents who were raised by two very different forms of colonization. Like my mother's country did not get free of the British, like what, 1963 or 4, you know? And so like while my father grew up in like the shadow of colonialism, my mother grew up under the thumb of it. You know what I mean? Like she was still feeling the fingerprint of it. And so I think for them, like everywhere they went, they saw the harm, you know? But also they lived most of their lives in Black communities and African communities, right? So for them, they knew that there was a completely different way, right? So that meant that rage didn't have to be all they had, right? And so I think that's the key, that like there is some that like this idea that like that rage could destroy you is just so confusing to me, because, you know what I mean? Because just like there is like, you know, when you get around just like other Black people and you get to just talk about how fucked up shit is, it is like, you know what I mean? Like your rage is, as a Black person in this country, especially as a Black woman, your rage is is your touch point to reality and all of this cognitive dissonance and all of these lies, you know? That's like, I feel like that's also why people of color, Black people especially, are able to hold on right now, because this country has always been like a fun house mirror, you know what I mean? And so like we can see the ridiculousness and like, and then touch reality, because we've always been living in it, you know what I mean? Because patriotism is the most confusing thing to me.
Super confusing.
You know what I mean? I'm just like, have you been outside? Like, it's just like so confusing to me. You know, people join the military not because they love this country. Most of them join it because they can't pay for college. You know what I mean? People don't love it. Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like this idea of like, what would I have to be to love this country, considering what this country does? You know what I mean? I don't want to be that person, you know? And so in terms of, yeah, I mean, it's just like what we're seeing now is just, it's just like we are inside of white America's suicide mission because like, you know, if you think about like the 12 stages of grief, for how many there are, we know the dangerous ones, you know,
Right.
and America has been stuck in the stage of like denial and anger, you know, because the fact that there hasn't been deep collective mourning in this country over everything it's done, over 400 years of enslavement, the fact that there hasn't been collective mourning and commemoration to that, I mean, that just tells you just like, it's like all that's left is destruction. You know what I mean? And so like, they can't even, because white America has never gotten to the other side of that. They don't understand that there is another side, you know, that like, it's just like that, like, they just think like the earth is flat and they fall off on the other side. You know what I mean? Like, but there's other things to be done. Like once you face history, you know, and like facing history is actually the only cure to the wound of it, you know what I mean? And so I think that that's like what we're in now is just like, it's just like, it's the height of farce, you know, like they're protesting a virus. It's just like, it's like if I took a picket sign out to hydrogen and said no more. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like the most, just like, what are you doing? But how does that work? Are you going to chase COVID out of town? Because if you wanted to do that, you would have stayed home. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think that like, you know, like I joke with my friends, I'm just like, do white people care about their children? You know, they won't save them from guns, from politicians. I didn't grow up with any white kids who ever had curfews. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like my parents found the like idea of children out at night ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like, because it kind of is. You know, like
for sure.
You like see a 16-year-old.
Like, I really appreciate how that like speaks to the kind of idea, like the idea of convergent and divergent ideas, like the fact that Black folks have continuously had to deal with some divergent shit in order to like, literally in order to survive, like you know, you had to have a counter narrative, you know, like you had to find a way to center yourself
exactly,
in a way.
When you don't, you know who you end up being? People like Ice Cube.
Well, yeah. And I watch Law and Order SVU. I'm not even gonna lie and say
no, that's Ice-T.
Oh no.
You leave Ice-T alone. Ice-T is just doing his bidding on TV, and he said Ice Cube was crazy too.
Oh my gosh. See, I got the Ices like mixed up for a second.
Right, I know. And see, that's another thing Ice Cube is messing up. Man. Like, we're good with Ice-T. He's doing his thing.
Like, wait a minute.
But like, you know, you see all the, like, think about how many toxic, like, how many, like Black men who are just like at the height of capitalism are embracing this. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing, is like, it's like, okay, instead of being able to go to Ice Cube and be like, look, bruh, like I have to deal with white lady in the office every day. You know, that's where my energy goes, you know?
Yeah.
I really respect what
that's part about quarantine though. Microaggression.
Way down. Way down. Way down. Because you can it's on record, the meeting, Susie. Like I heard what you said. But I really
like all that like daily stuff, you know,
I really appreciate what you said, like about kind of, because it made me think of how it's not just forgiveness that we have to perform, and how like kind of bringing it back to the forgiveness piece, like all of those different ways that we've learned to kind of like swallow like what we're really dealing with in order to keep ourselves valid, not only like valid and like seen and able to get up, but like literally safe. Like the amount of performing that goes on the daily basis, it's something, you know, it's been spoken about for years, you know, wearing a mask, double consciousness and things like this. But I just really respect, you know, the way that even even the title, Theater of Forgiveness, I was like, what? Like I was like, hold on here, like what? I was like, this is not a game. Like forgiveness is not a joke.
Because you have all these. They want us to think it is.
But that's the thing. You have all these people who are like, oh no, like you got to center yourselves, good vibes only, blah blah blah. It's like, no, like can you tell the cops to have good vibes only? Like could you tell the legal system to have good vibes only? Like could you give fucking Rush Limbaugh you know, tutorial in forgiveness? Like if we're expected to perform this sorriness, this low eye contact, this I really appreciated how in the end of the article, it started talking about unerasable lines, and it started talking about, even ways that you would in a lot of complex work, kind of integrate your Aunt Sarah's like lessons for later, and kind of live with those. And so like, there's no real question here.
I think that there's like, with Black people, there's always something to learn, and just like, she just drew her line in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because also, I mean, like, I'm like the first, me and my sister, like, we're the first like generation on both sides of our family, like our generation, to really grow up and mesh in the white world. You know what I mean? Like, and so like, I can literally see the bullshit because it's in front of me all the time, like they were like white, and like, and before we had the vocabulary and like the access of the internet to disseminate all this information, you were just in your community, and I imagine it's just like, how the confusion of like, is it white people if there are no white people here? Right. You know what I mean? But like, whiteness operates in every room, just like thinking about like, for most of us, or so many of us, and including like children who have immigrant parents like me, like the only language we have is the language of our captors, and I feel like once a month I'm seeing like an article about like 30 words you didn't know were racist, but were, you know what I mean? And this is the only language we have to take care of ourselves,
right. Right.
And it's like, and it's built to dehumanize us. It's built to, like there's like that like scene in Malcolm X where like where Denzel Washington's like reading the dictionary and he looks up black and he's just like like and he just like, black meant me, like black meant dark, evil me, like, and it's just like, yeah, this country demonizes us in every aspect, including the language.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark, did you have any?
You're doing great. Keep on going.
Well, I mean, like, speaking to the importance, I was telling my homie the other day, I was like, I both love and hate words, because I'm like, in the, even in a text message, I'm like, I'm not trying to come off to this. And there's like studies about, like, I still haven't been able to remove the exclamation points from my emails because I don't want to seem rude. Like, I don't.
Right.
Like, so, yeah. So like, I mean, thinking about the this being the only language that we have, and how like we usurped it, like how are we like fully subverting this language? Because I felt like throughout your article, the images, some of the juxtaposition I found between, some of the ways that you were like describing the church, like a yawning woman, like that, some of those different, the ways that you use language, I was like, yes, like this is fully a slap in the face to the white man, like all the way through and through, like. But not only that, but like, how do you see what you're doing as, a way to kind of not like owe anybody anything? I guess I'm just trying to ask, like, how you use writing as subversion, basically. Like, do you see your writing as subversion?
Well, like, Zora Neale Hurston like wrote this thing called like, the characteristics of Negro expression, right? And like one of the things it talked about, like the way Black people just take language and like we remix everything: sound, language, clothing, food, right? And so like even this like everything ugly in this country we have made beautiful,
right?
And that because like we can have fox the fox, like this like if like I don't know if you're familiar with like the tradition, like the history of like cakewalking. So like back like in enslavement, like I'm working on another project where I was like researching this. So like in enslavement, cakewalking, like enslaved people, they would literally like their like masters would like give them like some like raggedy white looking people's clothing, but it's above their station. They would literally just like walk around as though they're white people. So just like very just like exaggerated movements of just like being very hoity, right?
Yeah.
And they were mocking their white slave masters, but their white slave masters thought it was like didn't realize it was being mocked. They just like were getting a kick out of like Black people pretending to be human, right?
Wow.
And like the subversion of that, because enslaved people were allowed no private space, so they made it in public.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And in a way to be like that, like you, it comes to also just like point out the lack of humanity of this,
yeah,
of their captors. You know, like you think we don't have the humanity, but like you're the one who does it.
Right.
This is a little side tangent, but like a fun fact is, so what I was like, you know, so when you think, you know, remember Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Yeah.
So you know Carlton's dance, the Carlton?
Yeah.
Right? So they like they asked, like there's like Carlton, like he, like the actual actor like made up that dance, and he said that that like he was just thinking of the whitest dance he could come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a cross between like this Courtney Cox and Bruce Springsteen, like this song that like where they're dancing, and like an Eddie Murphy skit. But the character of Carlton, do you know who it's based on? Who was named after?
Who?
It was the show creators are white people, and they named it after their friend Carlton, who's the show creator of Lost.
What?
Like, yes. So this white guy, right? So the subversion. So to connect the points, the subversion is that like the joke of Carlton Banks is that like for these white show creators is just like imagining a Black boy so rich, so well spoken, there had to be a ghost of a white man inside of him.
No way.
And then the Black actor comes and then actually subverts that by being like, no, I'm mocking whiteness. You know what I mean? And so that's what I mean. Like Black people remix every single thing, you know, that like, there's like nothing that this country can own without us, because there's nothing it built without us, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that like, I think the same thing with language, that like, even that like you have given us this thing that can be so dangerous and so ugly. And like we're like portmanteauing words, we're pushing things together, we're just like adding like some verbs on things,
right.
You know, and then the whole country copies it, you know, like, you know, so it's like, I think that like language is our power. That's why they try to steal our narrative.
Yeah. I mean, specifically thinking about people, you know, how they try to keep it away from us for so long. People like who are enslaved going out and reading in the dark and like risking their lives to be able to find these words. Yep. One of the things that I keep coming back to, kind of speaking about subversion in your language, there's one of the quotes is, I think it was, he chewing rage like cud, chewing rage like cud. And cud is something cows chew, right? Or something like, yeah. And like, so just like juxtaposing like how human like rage is and kind of that cud, like animalistic, like whereas white people would see us as, you know, only human if we're able to forgive such sin. We're only civilized if we can do that. This kind of animalistic behavior of kind of chewing on that cud, and still like, for me, if you hold on to your rage and deal with it well, like that's the human part. You know what I mean? Like that's
exactly.
That's the complexity of the human brain and the beauty of, you know, working through your own emotions. But I just think it's so interesting how especially here, you're able to use that language kind of in a subvertive way, like all the time, like page after page, like idea after idea, even thinking about the point at which your dad tells you that Aunt Sarah actually saved you guys from staying at the grandpa's house, or how, you know, at the family gatherings, there was no alcohol, but people would still kind of laugh at jokes of people who had abused it, you know? And I'm just kind of wondering about this, like existing in mixed company, right? Existing with abusers and folks who have been abused. First, for me, like specifically speaking, like white people, we know that we need to deal with that relationship. But I always want to bring it back to like the relationship we have with our own. Like, is there something that you think is a necessity in not necessarily mending? Like, I mean, I don't necessarily think we have to mend all the relationships with abuse. Yeah. But is there something that you find necessary in at least like the naming of abuse, like in families? Is there something that you see as necessary in the like making it known? Because I know one of the points you made is like we're expected to give forgiveness without any harm being things like that. Like, is there anything you see as like a step in changing that?
Well, I mean, I think that like if you can't name it, you can't stop it. You can't even talk about it being there, you know? And I think like that's like the first issue. Like you can't fight something that you can't name. And I think that like if to not name what happens to someone is to say that they're not human. You know what I mean? I think this is why like you know, even though truth and reconciliation like commissions are so problematic, you know, because like, you know, it's just like they think that a stage is the same thing as justice, right? Because like like in America we still don't know what justice is or looks like, you know. This is a complicated work of abolition, you know. We have to, because that's what people first love to say, like what about the rapists and like the killers,
like, let's deal with homie that you can't stand your neighbor, bro. Like
yeah, exactly, you know. And so I think that like there is like this like deep necessity to name and say that like one, like I will witness you, and two, to say that like that there are so many ways to be human that like tell me how your humanity has been denied.
Yeah.
Because like, you know, when you think about like, you know, like what is happening now with COVID, when we think about all the ways people's humanity is being like violated, not just through like a lack of medical care and like a lack of government infrastructure, and but like from like a lack of being able to mourn their loved ones collectively,
right.
You know, they're like that is humiliating, you know, the way people are having to mourn right now. But also like the lack of just like that, like it interferes with like the students' access to education, right? And so that is just like, you know, and that is fundamental to like a historical connection to like enslaved life. That's the first thing, like they did not want us to be educated. And so like the desire and the need to learn and the want for it, like that is part of our humanity, right? And so I think that like if you don't name like the harms, you also don't understand like what it means to be human in this in like the time that we are in. And I think that like when you don't name it, you assign the shame to the victim, you know, because like there's nothing this country hates more than victims, you know. Like people are like, I don't want to be a victim, you know. Right. And it's just like it's worse to be a victim in this country than it is to be a perpetrator,
right?
You know.
Wow.
It was just wild to me.
Wow.
And so I think that like naming is the only way to place the shame where it belongs, because like, you know, there's that saying like, why do men rape? Because they can get away with it, right? And so like, you know, abolition work doesn't look like putting everyone in prison. It looks like a situation where it says if you rape whoever you rape, the community will not let you stay here. You will not be, or you will have to do something like to atone, you know. Mm-hmm. Because it's like putting people in prison doesn't give justice either, especially right. When like how like no like yes, it's like it's just like it's complicated, because like yes, we are all responsible for our actions, but to act like we live in or made in silos is racist,
right?
You know what I mean?
Right.
That like there is so much entangled to what this country has done to Black people. I mean, like literally one of the work that every Black person has to do is like find a place where they can love Blackness. Wow. Because like you literally aren't allowed to from birth, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so like that's what I mean, like I know exactly about your childhood, you know, like you were allowed to love Blackness, you know what I mean? Like just from what I see in the background, and that's like the work, you know?
Yeah, I mean it seems, and it is 3:54, just so everybody knows. But kind of like, I mean, I definitely want to connect it to your work on American that has just come out. My copy should be arriving. I got it on my phone, but I was like, I'm not reading this on my phone, so my copy should arrive tomorrow. It's, you know, I should be able to dig into it over the weekend.
Thank you.
I just wanted to kind of connect some of those different ideas, just like having to do with what you were kind of just saying, like the ways that we're not even able to name, or space is not created to name, or people thinking that naming is some kind of offense or attack. Specifically, I'm thinking of examples of like people, you know, like, and not just white people, like people in general who have absorbed whiteness, feeling that they are entitled to other people's kindness at work, mm-hmm. their smiles, their, you know, happy moods, their, you know, friendly conversation, you know, the deep intimate parts of people, folks thinking that they're entitled to those in the context of all of this different stuff we mm-hmm. also still have to perform. I just wanted to ask you a little. Mm-hmm.
I mean, this country thinks everything that it's possible for us to make, it belongs to them,
right,
including our freedom.
correct,
You know?
and that's
that says that like white people can't look over their shoulder and find a hero, you know? And so that is why they're afraid of history, because like every single generation of whiteness has tried to destroy entire groups of people.
Yeah.
You know, and people don't understand like that is so crushing. So this is what we mean when we say that like racism is toxic for whiteness. You know what I mean? Because like there is literally no way, if racism didn't exist, that COVID would be happening like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That like it corrodes them, and like people don't like recognize that. But like, you know, to your question about like an American, like so like an American is about like, my mom died when I was 19, and so it's kind of about, you know, grappling with like what does it mean to grieve like a dark-skinned Nigerian Muslim woman in a country that has painted all those things the enemy.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
Because like, you know, I like my mom died shortly after 9/11, when, you know, obviously like the war on terror has already been building before then, and painting like Islam as like this toxic space. But like, you know, through my mother's death, and through especially being so like close to 9/11, it just showed me that this country can make a weapon out of anything, even prayer, you know? And and so it was really trying to like and people don't understand that like heartbreak is a political condition, you know? Because like how do you grieve someone who everyone is assigning with as terrorists? Like, you know, because I remember like, you know, when we moved to South Carolina, I went from like, you know, an all girls white like school to a school that was majority Black, right? And I remember even my Black classmates were just like, we're gonna get those like, you know, those terrorists, like, and like every Muslim became a terrorist, and it just like, and then what? I'm just like, so even with the people that look like me, like my mother is still the enemy, and she's half of me, you know? And so it's really, and the thing is just like, it's so much easier to make enemies out of people when you live in the enemy's position, right? Because like you want relief, you know? And so it was just like, what now, you know? And trying to figure out like how just to untangle like the sadness with the fear with the surveillance, you know? Because like I also like it's just like, what would people do if more people knew that she was Muslim, you know what I mean?
Yeah. The last question I have, and I have to admit, it's kind of like a selfish question because you know, just thinking about writing like as an art form with like poetry and prose and stuff, like I'm just wondering like what, not even like what do you do to get into the writing game? Like what did you find as important to your practice to make writing a mode of expression that you took super seriously? Like what are some of the things that you have done to make this a sustainable practice for you?
I mean, like one, it was the only thing I've ever been good at. So like, you know, there's that. And I think that like, you know, my father's a visual artist. Like he like was taught like in like MFA programs my entire life. And so I am lucky in that like I never had anyone trying to talk me out of it. Like my dad was like super excited when I said I want to get an MFA in poetry, gave me no warnings about what that was actually going to look like, you know, so good and bad, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but like I never had any romantic notions that it wasn't going to be hard. Like we weren't rich, you know, we struggled. Like there were years like we were in scholarships for like the Elms, and so like I didn't have any romantic notions of it. But I think like for me, like, you know, reading is the most important thing, because like people always say like reading is a solitary activity, which I don't understand, because like the first time you experience a book, it's someone is reading to you, so you can never ever be alone again, because you spent your first years of your life with someone else's voice. And when you like are reading, you hear your voice, you hear a voice, right? You disappear into it. And so like, you know, like there's like the trick that people say, if you can't write, it's because you're not reading enough. And because like you literally are having a conversation, because just like also, and I mean from fiction to nonfiction, but also theory. I think it's so deeply important that people are reading like the work of Black scholars, but especially like Black trans activists and disability justice activists, because like the work has been done, and so much of like what we do has just been reinventing the wheel, because even within our marginalization, there are people that are marginalized, because even from the civil rights era,
Yeah.
they were pushing out Black trans
Right.
women, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think really like reaching back for the people who have done the work, because like, the more like activists that I've read, it helps me remember my own life from outside of a white gaze, and like that's what was going on. I mean, like everyone should be reading Angela Davis, just like I just can't even trust people who have it, because it's like you don't know, you can't see yourself. So I think that, but also just like making sure I'm not one of those people who like writes like there's a time to write every day, like in that way, but like I wake up really early, and so like I tend to write in the morning, but also like I think the key is just to find something that you want to write about. Like you need to find whatever your obsessions are, because once you find your obsession, you won't be able to keep yourself away. Like even when I'm tired, I'm just like trying to get back to that page, because like my mind is racing. But like also I think going easy on yourself, because like I think thinking about what you're writing is writing, reading counts as writing to me. And like sometimes I'm just like texting myself a sentence that I think about and like gnawing on that. And I think but yeah, I think diversifying like the kind of culture that you get. I think like part of like my like why I'm able to write the way I do is because like I had a different type of witness to witness. Like my father, like I saw the world, but I also saw my father's interpretation of the world, because my father like only paints Black and African people, and like growing up, he illustrated children's books. He used us as models, so like we literally saw ourselves literally reflected back. But like and like only white people had babysitters, so like we were taken everywhere, and so taking to art galleries, taking to music shows, like symphonies, like we were literally taken to all of it. So to really see that there are so many different ways to know the world, because I think that's one of the like kind of the difficulties of writing. It's like, how am I going to say something new,
right?
And that like you got to find a way to see the world outside of the way you've seen it, or to see it from somebody else's like lens, because like that's what Angela Davis, her focus on prisons is, because we look at prisons so we can understand the whole, and like when you lift up like the people who are the most marginalized, everybody comes up, and so like if all Black people were taken care of in this country, everybody would be taken care of in this country.
Just lavish, living good, like
right, would all be in mansions.
Is there anyone besides Angela Davis that you're reading right now that you're super stoked about?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, because I'm reading like so much for just research. I think one book that's really good that I'm reading for research is called Ethical Loneliness. It's like the injustice of not being heard. And so like she defines this term, it's like essentially like being abandoned by society and like the pain of that. And it's like, people who have been like victims of torture or like grave crimes, and then being released into the society who doesn't seek justice for you.
Wow.
So you never know that it can't happen again, right? So I think like that's a really good book. This book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, is incredible.
Wow.
Like it sounds incredible, but like it talks about like like war is a culture, it's fashionable, it's like literally like where we get all of our meaning from in this world, because people talk about like we do this in wartime, but in the history of the world there's been like 19 years where there hasn't been war or something like that. Like yeah, and so like if things are permissible only in wartime, but if we're always in wartime, everything is permissible,
right?
So that book is really good. I think like there's this poetry. Oh, here it is. Build Yourself a Boat by Kamau
I have
Felix.
that. It's so
it's like it's essentially perfect.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like so it's really a good book.
Even though some of the poems are just like this long, they took me like I had to sit with it, just be like, what are you saying like, to me?
Like, cuts you. And then I think another book is like there's this book, Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. It's an edited collection of disability writers like writing about that. And then like the new museum has a series of books that is so cool, and one of them is called Trapdoor. It's just an anthology of trans activists and writers writing about like different things from like culture to like activism to media, and it's like it just like is mind-blowing from beginning to end. And like, you know, it was really when I started like diving into the work of disability justice and trans activists that I was just like, oh fuck, this has all been done. We're literally just repeating their work, you know what I mean? I'm just like, and what fucking assholes are we? You know, because right there, that I think because that gets at the idea of ethical loneliness, that you're fighting for yourself and people are acting like you're not. And so then they're just like, then they have a revelation. It's just like when a white guy comes in after work and just like in a work meeting just says the same thing you said, you know, and everyone's just like, Bob.
You know? You've really done it today.
Mark, you know, it's always really Bob.
Today.
You know.
Wow.
Here's the things I'm reading.
Wow, thank you so much, man. I mean, I really could just like keep going, but I know, Mark, do you have any things? I think it's after 4.
The biggest thing is just thank you so much, so generous with your time, and I was just
thank you for not giving up on me.
No, the whole thing is just like being able to like, I mean, I did want to sort of step back a little bit, but like this was just so amazing just to listen to you. And also Sarai, thank you so much also for your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really incredible because like the whole thing, especially like this whole purpose of reading, right?
Yeah.
And I love how you just spoke to that too, because there's this whole debate about like what's reading really for. And when I try to sort of share like what Article Club is trying to do, it's like, oh, cute. Like that's a cute little thing that you're doing. And like, no, we are doing things.
We're really doing stuff. Like,
yeah, I mean, like books change your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? What are like, we're this in kind of like war is about story. You know what I mean? You got to learn how you need to know how other people are telling stories about you, you know? And like, it's a way to find your own life and your own people and your own story. And like, it's also a way to like love yourself.
Yeah.
That's just ridiculous to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for being part of Article Club. And I cannot wait to share this with the rest of the folks.
Oh my God.
Thank you. And this was amazing. So you both keep in touch.